You're listening to Monday Matters, a Principal Matters podcast production.
Hi, Principal Matters listeners. This is Will Parker along with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke, back for another Monday Matters. Jen, we sent out a survey to listeners recently, thanks to Emily, and we've been getting some mixed results. People that want to keep the show a Monday and a Wednesday and a Friday encore. Some that are like, yeah, it doesn't matter to me if you can combine it back. So if you got that survey or if you see it online, please respond, because otherwise we don't have your feedback. But it did make us feel good to see people saying how much they, in fact, one listener said, could you make it longer on Mondays? So, no guarantee that we're going to make this longer. But we wanted to start off this week by, first of all, just saying welcome to the end of May, one of the hardest months of the school year. And Jen, I want to just bring into today's conversation some more feedback from my newest book, Whose Permission Are You Waiting For? But before we do, how are you doing? And what's life looking like for you and your family? You have a senior getting ready to graduate.
Yes, absolutely. We're I don't know, look at me, I'm speechless. I don't know to tell you what's happening in my life right now. Yes, I have a senior, and then I have a one finishing up her freshman year, and we're just trying to enjoy every moment, you know? Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't ready for that question, I guess, because it's so enmeshed in what we're doing every day.
Well, I can see you, and all the listeners can, and there was a little buffering going on in our connection there too. So I was wondering, like, is Jen even hearing me? And then, but you jumped in right at the right time. I'm going to start with a story about you. When I wrote this chapter called "Will It Fly," in my newest book, I'm trying to continue along this theme with leaders about, if you know that there's something you want to experience new in your work, or maybe you're even thinking of changing something within your career, it doesn't have to be a transition outside of what you do. It could even be improvement within what you already do. How can you give yourself permission to just try something, even though you may fail? And it was probably 2020, Jen, when you and I were already doing a lot of shows together.
Mhm.
And I was explaining to you back then, because at that point I was working as an executive director for our state principals association, but I had been podcasting since I'd been a principal, and I was just confiding in you that this has been a really great hobby. I've enjoyed it, but it's also a huge time commitment, and so the return on that time isn't always equal to the time, because at the time I didn't have sponsors. I wasn't doing a lot of ongoing training. Occasionally I might be invited to keynote and things like that. And you just straight up were like, well, why don't you do something about that? And I was like, well, what do you mean? You're like, well, what are some things you would do if you could? And at the time I couldn't ask for sponsors because I didn't want a conflict of interest with the work I was doing at the association with that were sponsoring our events. I didn't want to go into that world and create that kind of conflict, but now we have sponsors. So, but at the time I could do training if it was outside my normal work hours. And so you were just like, I was like, well, I've always wanted to try a mastermind. And you're like, well, just try it. Just see what happens. So we sent out this huge shout out, and it was during COVID. And at first I just said, hey, free, pull together collaboration. About 20 people signed up. And I did about 6 weeks of just meeting with them regularly. And then at the end of that, I made a pitch of a call. Hey, if you want to continue to do this, here's the offer. We can go on, but this is an agreement that involves some financial commitment too. And I had a group of 6 that said yes. And that was my very first, to try something ongoing. And so I wanted to begin there, Jen, because you may not even remember that story, but encouraging people to try something, even if it's not going to work, is, I think, an important part of growth.
Well, absolutely. And I do remember that conversation very clearly because, it was easy for me to say because I wasn't the one taking the risk. But I think about that from our listeners' perspective, and being in a building. And we've talked a lot about being a principal and how sometimes it feels like middle management because you have to get permission to try things that are kind of out of the ordinary from your district or division's perspective. Yet you're also extremely accountable to the people who come there every day and work or learn or whatever. And so to apply Will's learning to a building-based principle, I think we can say if there's something that's not working, if there's a system that you think there's got to be a better way to do this. Um, there's absolutely no harm in trying. I love me a good pilot where you say, here's something I'd like to try, but I'm going to do it with a grade level or with a classroom or with a group of parents. And you try it and see if it works. And if it doesn't, okay, great information. Actually, Will, you, Emily, and I were talking about that before we started recording about even if something fails spectacularly, you have good information. You learn that
Yeah.
that was not a thing that you probably should proceed with. So, in terms of, I like to circle this back to the title of your book. Whose permission are you waiting for? It might be your own permission that you're waiting
Mhm.
for. You're waiting for yourself to say, "Hey, let's do this."
Well, I think it was at least 2 years ago. I was reading while I was flying. I was reading the biography of Wilbur and Orville Wright from David McCullough. It was such an interesting book to read while flying. And
Right.
and you look back at that time period and you're like, well, the world changed when those guys learned how to fly. Well, the truth is, the world didn't change. It took them it took them years and years of trying and failing before they finally did fly. And even when they did fly, it took them 5 years before anybody would even pay attention,
Right.
before it became an international sensation to realize what they were even doing. And I think sometimes we expect the outcomes to be immediate whenever we try something, or we want the outcomes to be immediate, and they don't always work. I've tried many things within, whether it's a school setting or a classroom setting or in this work I do now, that just didn't work. But you don't know if they're going to work unless you try it. And so I guess, Jen, as a leader, how do you find that balance between the people you're accountable to, because you want to make sure you're serving them well, but also the permission to take risks?
Right, right. I think about a time that I was the principal of an elementary school and I really wanted to do one book, one school, but that had kind of been done and it was hard to find a book that would speak to 5-year-olds and whatever, 12-year-olds. And so then I got the idea of doing an all-school writing project. And I had hooked into Larry Smith, who is a friend of mine who did the 6-word memoir initiative. And so we had every kid write a 6-word memoir and we published it in, some cheap little company ran these things through and every kid got a book of 6-word memoirs of every student in the school, 600 of them. And I thought it was a roaring success. I loved it. But in order to get it started, I had to ask 70 staff members to take that risk with me. And that's where it got tricky because you can want to try something, but you might really waste people's time in colossal ways. It might not work. People might be resentful. People might be like, I've got too much on my plate. Now this lady's asking me to ask my kids to write a story. And so it was a success, but we didn't do it again. I think because I did that value analysis where I thought it was super fun, but it's a one-time thing. We're not going to do this every year. Um, and I guess all of that is to say it's a constant shifting of ROI, the return
Mhm.
on your investment of time and asking others to be on the ride with you. Um,
No, that's what a great story. And you're right, because sometimes just even successful experiences don't mean that they're worth trying again, depending
exactly.
on the outcomes that they have for the people that you're trying to work with or serve.
But
This term, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, a lot of times principals might want to change something operationally in their building. Um, and and it's hard to do because many times those operational things are the way they are because they've always been that way. So think about dismissal. Think about the ways the buses pull up and pull out. Think about where kids stand for fire drills. Think about how attendance is taken or how parent conferences are run. And sometimes it can feel exhausting to try something new and to take that risk. Um, but once you've, vetted out all the ways it can go wrong and you've got a plan in place, it can be transformative. And you really can have your staff look at you like, wow, that was much needed. We didn't even know it was needed, but what a what an awesome change this is for our building because somebody had the courage to do something differently.
Well, I'm going to give a quick shout out to a buddy of mine, Brent Klein, who's a principal in Palo Alto. We were talking recently, and he was telling me that exact same thing, Jen, that he was getting feedback from teachers on ways they could increase more times for PLCs. But he also knew, well, there needs to be an exchange here. If we're going to add time, we need to give up time somewhere else. And so collaborating, pulling people together, they've come up with some ideas of some tweaks they can make next year. But he's communicating that now in May versus waiting until the school starts, so that they can think about it, get some feedback, tweak those things before they start. And so those operational changes can be really helpful. But you and I both know sometimes you've got to kind of try it a little bit to see what's going to work.
And it can be so simple too. I hope I've not told this story on this podcast before, but I was working in a school once where the school was right on a very, very busy thoroughfare. And there was one bus that was jam-packed with kids, and they went to one apartment complex, and it was about a mile away. And the bus turned left, and it had 6 or 7 stoplights, and there was always so many behavior problems on this bus. You could not believe in a mile and a half how much shenanigans kids could get into. And I would ride the bus with them, and I would talk to the driver. It was a mess. And then one day I had this eureka moment, and I thought this bus needs to turn right, and they need to take the highway over to the apartment complex. So I called the transportation person. He said, no, it's like 3 miles if we do it that way. I'm like, but I think these 6 stoplights are creating opportunities for these kids to punch each other. How about if we just try the highway? And lo and behold, it was a miracle. The kids were fine. It was because the bus was always moving.
Mhm.
And so that's a risk, a tiny, tiny little risk. We just had to try it for
Mhm.
a few days to know if it was going to be a success or a failure. But that was an operational change that the transportation director was willing to work with me on. And we're like, well, let's try it. And to this day, I think that bus is turning right. Even though it's farther, it's much more effective because there's no stoplights.
Oh, that's such a great example. Well, this whole idea of will it fly, I borrowed from a content creator named Pat Flynn, who has a wonderful uh, business podcast called Smart Passive Income. And back when I was first starting my website, I used his tutorials to learn how to podcast, Jen. But then he started talking about these concepts that he would do because he started several businesses but he would try them first. Let me just see. Let me try this. Let me see if the audience wants this. Let me see if somebody is really interested in this product before I launch really big. And so as I've tried to apply that over the years in leadership, whether it's creating mock schedules before you do them, or let's try a new bus route, or let's try a different time of day that the kids go from one point to another point. Here's some things for Principal Matters listeners. Here's some things for you just to keep in mind as you think about like practical will it fly suggestions. One, think about making like a list of potential changes. What are some things you would want to change that would make things more effective, or that would make you feel like you're being more productive, or maybe there's even a change you want to see within your own career trajectory. What would be potential changes where you want to see something different? Two, what would be the challenges you would list within those changes that would have to be identified, because there's always an obstacle? Three, whose feedback can you seek that could give you better insights to what could be done next? Four, who is somebody you might could shadow that's already doing something like that you could just step alongside and kind of watch how it's done? Next, is there a place you could go volunteer to learn how to do the thing you want to do if there's something really big that you've never experienced before? And then finally, if you have an idea of something that you're going to want to do, could you create a sample of what that looks like before you start? So that you could sample it, test it, get a feel for it before you go really big with it. And then who's a group of trusted people you could pilot that sample with so that you could test it before you go all in. And so just some practical things, Jen, to keep in mind as you're reflecting on how that's how inventors do it. That's how people have done it in the past. That's how your greatest teachers are doing things in their classrooms. And sometimes we just need to revisit those principles for ourselves.
Right. And so for principals, whether it's something personal that you are thinking about, something that is in the personal and professional space, or if it's something about your school, your students, your staff, your community, follow those steps. And I love, like I said, I love me a good pilot. Try it out. What the heck? Why not?
I love it. Well, Principal Matters listeners, thank you for checking in with us on this Monday. For those of you that are wrapping up school, congratulations. For those of you that are still a few weeks out, congratulations and best wishes to you. For those of you that are listening after this recording's been out a while, or maybe you're on the other side of the globe and you're not even close to being done, thank you for your trust. Thank you for all that you're doing. And until next time, thanks for doing what matters.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Monday Matters.